Many thanks to the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast privacy champion, MindOS, for sponsoring this episode and for supporting our podcast. Data governance has become an even more difficult challenge with constantly evolving regulatory frameworks and AI systems set to introduce monumental complications. That's why I think organizations need MindOS. This platform helps organizations control and manage their enterprise data by providing a continuous single source of truth. Start today with a free personalized demo of MindOS, the industry's top no-code privacy and data ops solution. For more information about MindOS, visit their website at www.mindos.ai. Enjoy the show. Personal views and opinions expressed by our podcast guests are their own and are not legal advice or official statements by their organizations. Hello, my name is Debbie Reynolds. They call me the Data Diva. This is the Data Diva Talks Privacy podcast, where we discuss data privacy issues with industry leaders around the world with information that businesses need to know now. I have a special guest on the show, a fellow Chicagoan, Sean Vargas-Barlow. She is a senior global privacy product and AI counsel, has been for several corporations. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be on the show.
Yeah, you're a doll. So we met on LinkedIn. You reached out to me and we ended up having lunch in Greektown, one of my favorite places to go in Chicago. And since then, we've done a couple of things together. I had you come with me to speak at a particular event, and I think you asked me to speak at something. So we're always trying to find ways to connect and do things together. But I think you just have such an interesting background, and your knowledge in privacy is tremendous. Also, you just have a great personality. I think you're really spunky. And
A little spunky, okay. Well, I asked you a question when we had lunch, and I said, so what do you think is going to happen first? Will we have the first US female president, or will we have a comprehensive federal privacy law in the US? I said, what do you think is going to happen first? So that's kind of a spunky question.
yeah.
I don't remember what you said first. I think you just laughed.
Oh, goodness. I know those are definitely pie in the sky at this point, I believe. Tell me a little bit about your career trajectory and how you got interested in privacy.
I like to think that I was into privacy before it was cool. So I think that in 2003, I earned an LLM in privacy law and IT law. That's way before GDPR. So I think that I've always had a passion for technology in the intersection of technological development and issues like privacy. It's always been sort of a passion of mine. And I had a great experience at Accenture where I worked first as sort of commercial counsel, but I was always had my goal was I wanted to be privacy counsel. So I racked up all of these certifications and I did whatever I could in terms of positioning myself to get that privacy counsel role. And it was a chance also for me to deliver value by kind of enabling the business. I definitely don't want to be a privacy counsel where the answer is no, you can't do this. No, it's like, it's finding like, how do you enable the business, which is building consumer or customer trust by safeguarding privacy while at the same time figuring a way in which, how can they achieve their objective responsibly?
That's fascinating. I always love to hear stories about how people did that transition or that pivot in their career. Because as you say, I think my interest in privacy, for me, it was a personal one. It started in the 90s, right? No one cared about it then. And I thought it was really interesting. And then so I sort of merged it together with my technology career. And then here we are.
And here we are.
Yeah.
Yes, I think you have to have sort of a drive because I think that my career is very unique in that my first counsel position was at the Office of the Public Guardian. So I was representing abused and neglected kids in juvenile court. And while I was having an impact and making a difference, I realized it wasn't the area of law that I wanted to practice long term. So while I'm handling 140 cases, I got two masters of law, one in IT and privacy, and the other one in IP law. And so that was working, it was a really tough job. And then working hard at night, taking doing these LLMs. So it was a lot of drive and passion that had in my mind where I wanted to go. And I think a career is a marathon. And I'm really inspired by Diane Nyad's story where at the age of 60, after her fifth attempt, she swam from Cuba to Florida. And there was a lot of obstacles. She had her eye on, I'm going to find a way. There was like sharks, and she could be stung by jellyfish, like that are lethal. And I think in our journey, I always had a passion for privacy and also emerging technologies. But there's been obstacles on the way, and it takes a lot of drive and passion and not giving up.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I want to touch on something that you said that I think is very important, and I want your thoughts on this. And that is that not just the drive and passion, definitely that, but there's an element of self-learning that has to happen. I think if you want to really succeed in a privacy career, especially if you're trying to go into a career and that's not like your job now. Tell me a little bit about that because I think people feel like, oh, no one's going to hire me for privacy. It's like, well, are you volunteering? What are you doing? Are you reading the cases? Are you keeping up with technology? What are you doing in your other outside job time to really hone your skills in that area? I want your thoughts.
That is such an excellent question. I think that you point to a really important skill, which is a learning agility. And I think that if someone wants to sort of get into privacy, I think it is volunteering, getting involved IAVP network. I think that you also don't have to think about that you need to know everything about privacy. I mean, I've been practicing in the privacy space for a long time, and I still don't know everything. And it's so hard to keep up with all the different changes. I think it's all about your attitude and also getting involved in discussions. I just joined an AI book club. So I'm looking forward to conversing with other interested professionals about AI. And so I'm constantly learning.
Absolutely. And then, just to maybe take that one step further beyond your self-learning, I highly recommend that people find a way to get plugged in to maybe, let's say, maybe there's an organization that does standards or something that you're interested in that helps you maybe even network with other people on a project. So, for example, I think you had invited me to do a talk about privacy in healthcare, and that was a organization. I can't remember the name. Oh, it was ACC, right?
Yeah, ACC, right.
Yeah. ACC, where you're collaborating with other people who are in these spaces. You're able to show your thought leadership there. Those are things that I highly recommend. So when people come to me and like, hey, how can I get plugged in? I'm like, well, are you plugged into any organization where you can contribute and network and be able to really hone your skills? What are your thoughts about that?
Yes, I think participating in projects with others, or sometimes even creating your own project. Like I created my own project. I'm collaborating with someone that I used to work with at Accenture on a book on AI. And so I'm like, I just created my own project. Sometimes you try to network with others and learn from others, but sometimes you can create your own project and then just think about what you want to bring to the project. It's about giving, not just necessarily taking. And what's the sort of impact that you want to have on the project?
Yeah, definitely next level thinking. I agree. This is a space where is new enough where everyone can have their own niche, so to speak, and their own point of view. And so being able to do thought leadership in those ways, including writing a book, I think that's fantastic. I can't wait to read it.
Oh, thank you.
I think that'll be definitely great. Let's talk a little bit about just career and privacy. I remember I used to put out Google alerts for privacy. I don't know, this is like before GDPR, and there would be nothing for years, right? Like no one was writing about privacy, no one was talking about privacy. GDPR, even in the US, it took until May 2018 before you actually saw articles and papers really about privacy and stuff. And now it's like a fire hose. But tell me a little bit about what's happening in privacy careers. What are you thinking about? What people should be thinking about where we are now? Because you were interested in privacy at a time where people really weren't paying attention. And now, because it's such a hot issue, I think that career trajectory could be a bit different. I just want your thoughts on that.
I would look at IAPP and how it's grown, right? And you can also think about your own career in that way. Like IAPP, still very, very focused on privacy, but now they're realizing that privacy professionals are really being called to step up and lead on AI governance. And because of our experience of putting in place like a privacy governance program at different companies and conduct privacy impact assessments and all of those skills. So I think that for me, I'm thinking in terms of what am I passionate about in privacy? And then what areas do I want to maybe expand into as well? And that for me, it is moving into a space of where I leverage my privacy skills and experience and transfer those to kind of helping with AI governance. If you're starting in your career or you're maybe mid-level in your career, I think that you may end up seeing a pivot to data privacy professionals to being data professionals because there's so many different, it's not just regulation of data privacy, but the EU Data Act regulating data itself. Those are just my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, I'm a data person, so that's kind of my background.
You're a data diva.
I think those skills can be transferable. One gap that I see a lot in this space that I think is going to be challenging for some is that you still need data people, right? In this governance space, and there are people who've been doing this for a really long time. So I think as people think maybe privacy people or people who are trying to pivot into privacy or try to hone their skills in I think especially the technological innovations are going to be key in terms of people needing to understand not just technology, but understanding how to work cross-functionally within an organization. What are your thoughts?
I think that working cross-functionally is really important. I think that I could just speak from my perspective. At the companies I work for Accenture, Cognizant, and ResNet, I've had to partner very closely with engineering and product teams, like building privacy by design into different product or service offerings. And I think it's being able to understand their perspective and where they want to go. And then I almost think that there's also sometimes you have to be a translator. And it's this translator kind of going back and forth because you may be talking to a software engineer and you have to know enough about tech to kind of understand the tech stack, but they're translating their concepts to you as in-house counsel. But then I'm also translating some concepts to the business professionals that I'm working with in terms of, well, what is anonymization? Very specific, like legal definition, right? And so I am having to translate. So it's being able to work collaboratively and understand and have translate and have a common language. And then also working cross-functionally to define what those requirements are. What do you need to have? What would you like to have? And then what risk you're willing to take. And just being able to be conversant and talk with people with different backgrounds is very key. But that's not just for privacy, that's across the board, being able to work cross-functionally because everyone's coming at their own different perspective.
I think that's true. I think that's a skill that's going to become even more in demand as we see companies implement AI systems and it touches data at all points within an organization. So those people like you who have those skills, I think you'll be in much higher demand than people who are more like in the Santa's workshop with the blinders on and just working on one thing. I definitely think so.
I think you raise a really good point, being in the Santa's workshop. I think that companies that really seen a lot of growth are companies that are doing away from silo mentality. Because obviously when you talk about Santa's workshop, I think you're talking about silo mentality. And it's all about being a team. It's not just the marketing team versus the legal team versus the engineering team. We're all kind of one team and it's in a siloed. And I think that when I was at Cognizant, the general counsel, he was talking about breaking down those silos and working cross-functionally. And that was really important. And I was really inspired by that. So getting rid of that silo mentality. I like your point. That was a great point.
Yeah. Now, we've had some deep thoughts and deep conversations on privacy, just in general about the future. One thing that we have had some chats about that I would love your thoughts on, and that is personalization. Okay. So when I hear the word personalization, when someone talks about it in the technical term, my privacy sirens go off. Personalization. So personalization means that companies want to tailor more experiences to the individual. And in order to do that, they're typically collecting more information. Obviously, if it's a business to consumer thing, some of that is voluntary. So the person consents to give someone more information about it. My concern, I have a couple of concerns, but one of my bigger concerns is that someone or organizations have in the past run afoul of privacy regulations or data governance issues because the data may have been collected for one purpose, but is used for another purpose within the organization. So give me your thoughts on the perils of personalization as it relates to privacy.
The perils of personalization. That sounds like that could be a book title. Maybe that could be our next panel together.
That'd be great.
The perils of personalization. Yes.
We have to do that. Yeah.
I think that, well, going back to the idea of there's different perspectives, right? So the business perspective is, well, we want to personalize because it is going to help you deliver more value to the customer, right? And or it will give us more insights into the customer so we can improve our products. So personalization is seen as a desired business goal and business objective. And I think that I try to be a trusted business partner and I say, okay, I see where you want to go. But part of that journey is you want to also make sure you build consumer trust. Yes, there's a path for personalization. If you don't factor in consumer trust, then everything that you've done could be undone and potentially even reputational damage or FTC actions if, and now we're talking about the perils of personalization, if you don't take into account to make sure that there's proper transparency. And in some cases, you also may need to get consent, depending where the jurisdiction is. And then you also have to understand what the purpose, as you said, you made a great point about the purposes. Sometimes when you want to do personalization, it's almost like a two-parter. Sometimes business teams want to first, we don't know exactly what we want to do, but we just want to get the data, do some R&D on it, and then we want to figure out how we can better personalize and get consumer insights. So there's, like you're saying, like you may have one purpose right now, you just want to train, and then you have a secondary purpose, like later on you want to take those insights and then use something with it. So I think then it's about talking about How do you get to that path depending on each of those objectives? Just think about OpenAI. There's many complaints, and also there's FTC investigations and things like that. But yeah, even just thinking about from the consumer perspective, what you're using my data to train the AI ML models. And so there was a response, right? You could make a request. But you have to think about those things. You have to think about consumer trust. I know I've been talking that, so I want you to have a chance to, what are your reflections on what I just said?
I agree with that. We've had a guest, a dear friend, Andoa Newton. She was former general counsel at Louis Vuitton, Hennessy, and Moet. And she had a great episode. She talks a lot about personalization. So companies really like it because they feel, like you said, it brings more value to the customer, it brings more revenue, right? It can engender more data sharing, right? People trust the company, they'll share more data with them. But then that flip side is making sure that that data is used for the purpose that it was intended to and it doesn't get lost. And to me, that goes back to that governance question, right? About, okay, this is what you have data for, this is what you can use it for. Then you have to think about the purpose. So I think that somehow the way companies have handled data in the past, if they don't have that lineage in mind, or they lose the purpose or lose the plot about how data is handled, they can definitely run afoul of privacy laws and end up in hot water. And this is really a typical example because I can't remember what company, but it was a big company, one of the biggest companies. They had gotten into some hot water because they had collected some data for multi-factor authentication. And then the marketing people say, hey, let's use this information for marketing. And it's like, wait a minute. I think the FTC jumped in. I think this was Twitter, as a matter of fact. The FTC jumped in and like, hey, you can't do that. You're not supposed to do that, right? 'Cause the people who are giving you their information for two-factor authentication never intended to have that information used for marketing purposes.
Exactly. And that violates the consumer trust. But I gave you data for one thing, and then now I give you the data just for you to get the service, but now you're selling it to these third-party advertisers, and I didn't know you were going to do that. Violate the trust. You talked about data lineage. I was thinking of how sometimes I'm a data privacy professional, but sometimes I feel like I'm a data detective where I'm trying to figure out the data lineage. And I joked to my husband as a former Chicago police detective, but I said, yes, I'm a data detective. Of course, I think I'd like to think of myself as a very friendly data detective when I'm working in-house. Just, okay, so the data, where did you get the data from? And was it personal data? And then what did we disclose at the time to the customer about what it was used for? And then you even have to even do more. Let's say it's from a third party, but then that third party also gets the data from other third parties. When I was at Accenture, I had to do a lot of data sourcing due diligence. In terms of what consents did the third party get? And then what did they require from their third parties? So again, it's like a data detective. Maybe that could be my moniker. Like your data diva, be like the data detective.
I love that.
But I don't think anyone would watch. I don't know if I had a little show on it. I don't know if anyone would watch it because I don't know if it's that exciting. When I go to parties, everyone, they ask me, well, what do you do? And they, well, I'm in data privacy. And then they asked my husband, well, what do you do? At the time, he was the police officer, and everyone wanted to talk to him. And you're like, well, he always sort of simplifies what I do. He was like, oh, those privacy notices, like those HIPAA notices. That's what she does. So much more exciting. But everyone wants to talk to him. But maybe if I said I'm a data detective, they'd be more interested.
I know. I think you always have to bring it down to a customer level, right? The things that they're interested in. You don't want Facebook to steal your data or whatever. It's so funny because I've had conversations with people who say, they don't really care about privacy. And you talk to them 5 minutes and they're in an uproar, right? Their face is red. They're like, oh, hands are flailing and stuff like that. Once they figure out what's going on, right? So I think because people are very self-interested, if you bring it down to a person, you'll be the belle of the ball. Everyone will be chasing you down at parties, trying to figure out, hey, how do I do this on my phone? Stuff like that.
I think I just need to go to a party with you. You should come to a party with myself and my husband. And then I would love to see you do that. like outshine him. Not that it's like a competition or anything, but I would just love it. Everyone would just start turning to you, and then you can show me how you do it to get people super excited.
That's right. That's right. Yes, yes, we should do that. That'd be so much fun. Oh my goodness. What is happening in the world right now, whether it be in privacy or technology, that's concerning you? Something you see, you're like, oh wow. Oh, I don't know if I like this.
I don't know if I like this.
Or just concern, just something that's getting your attention.
Well, I think as a parent, I think that I was concerned about when I learned that my son had a chat GPT account. And I thought, well, yeah, there's probably lots of kids that have chat GPT accounts. And then in my mind, I'm thinking of Kappa, or he also uses Roblox. And I'm thinking about how they're using that data. And Fortnite's gotten into trouble of that. So I think that you're seeing more like FTC enforcement actions and misuse of and not complying with COPPA, not getting the appropriate verifiable parental consent. So yeah, so from a parent perspective, yeah, I'm concerned about that. From an in-house privacy counsel, I'm trying to, and for Fortune 500 companies who have locations all across the world, it is trying to come up with appropriate framework. So in the US, you have all of these different privacy laws that are kind of popping up, and you see some similar threads. And then let's expand the view and just think about what is going on with cross-border regulation. If you think about it, cross-border data is so important in terms of facilitating teleworking, virtual collaboration, delivering services. It's like the blood to the digital economy to be able to enable cross-border information flows. But you have all these different countries that have their own spin. How do you develop a compliance mechanism? And then also, if you think about it, it could be really crazy. Well, it is crazy if you're entering into contracts and then there's multiple cross-border data transfer flows. So standard contractual clauses for the EU, then you have to do a transfer sort of impact assessment. And then let's say Argentina has its own model clauses. And then let's say you have data that's coming from China, then you have to assess whether or not it's important data and do important data. You have to do a security assess. And then you also could have just different countries may have their own model clause. You could have like a whole contract that's really very cumbersome, right? And it's like, I think we need to move to a path of recognizing more frameworks. I mean, there are concerns about cross-border data transfers, and I understand the need for sort of regulation, but maybe can you recognize the standard contractual clauses? You got to make sure you have appropriate supplemental measures. So I've talked a lot, and I want to get your thoughts on my concerns around cross-border transfers and the regulation of it, the challenges of multinational companies and complying with that.
Yeah, it's hugely challenging. I've been doing cross-border transfers before they were even standard contract clauses, dating myself at this point, right? And I think almost every year, IAPP or different companies do surveys about the toughest part of a data privacy job. A lot of times cross-border is on the top of the list because it is complicated, right? So we have all these new laws, we have all these new clauses, different countries do things different ways. One framework that I like a lot, and I think the US has co-signed and said they support this, and that's the APAC privacy framework, because I think the important thing that they recognize, they're like, look, we aren't the same, but there are some foundational principles that we need to share in some ways. And then we need to respect some of those more specific things per country. So having that approach, I think, is better, easier in a type of cross-border situation, as opposed to the idea like, we do things like this and you need to be like us, right? And I just think that's just not gonna work. That's just not realistic. The example I give about this is like, after September 11th in the US, there was this person who tried to go through an airport in the US with a shoe bomb. He was not successful, but As a result of that, for 20 years now, plus, you have to take off your shoes in the airport in the US, right? And so I travel all over the world and I don't have to take my shoes off when I go to Europe or South America or whatever, right? So that's a very US specific thing, right? The other countries, they did not experience that. So we have differences culturally, I think, in the way that we approach different things. I don't think it's helpful to say you need to be like us, right? Because I think every jurisdiction has their own history, like Europe. Like Europe had Nazi Germany. So that's why for them, privacy is a fundamental human right. And for them, it's okay, we achieve privacy by not sharing too much. In the US, I feel like, especially after September 11, it's like, well, you need to get more information and it would be more secure in some way, right? So it's a very different approach, but I don't think that we're going to reach a level of sanity on it until we realize that we are not the same. But then we need to have some foundational principles that we can share. What are your thoughts?
I agree with you in terms of trying to understand what is the history and the cultural influences in terms of understanding a country's perspective when it comes to cross-border data transfer flows. I also think that with digitization and the globalization, it's important for the digital economy to have trustworthy cross-border transfer flows. So like you said, the APAC framework, or having foundational principles to make sure that the data is handled responsibly and with appropriate security. I think that these one-off regulations that maybe aren't transferable are just, another sort of unique regulatory hurdle that you have to overcome. It can be challenging for multinational companies. A lot of them do want to do the right thing. Let's create a path so that you can do that. And so having something like APAC would be really helpful, like more of those, or one global. That's right. Let's dream big. One global cross-border framework.
Yes, one big global.
It's going to be bigger than Taylor Swift's Eras tour. And we got to dream big.
Oh my goodness. That is so funny. I think that's true. I don't know. I saw Europe trying to update their data directive. I thought, hey, someone on the international level is going to take the reins of this and say, hey, we need like a international something. And this has not happened. I'm like, hey, where are you? Where are you? I don't know.
Yes, in the US, we now have data controller and processor in our terminology, and many of the same principles. And I mean, there's definitely important differences, but it's also influenced even PIPL or PIPL. I've heard it say different ways. It's influenced.
Yeah.
And it will also happen with the EU AI Act.
Absolutely. That's true. That's true. Yeah. I guess it's coming from a different angle, but yeah, there is definitely influence and there's data information sharing amongst jurisdictions. So I'm always happy to see when the language is somewhat more similar as opposed to city, states, and provinces trying to come up with something new, reinventing the wheel. So if it were the world according to you, Sean, and we did everything you said, what would be your wish for privacy anywhere in the world, whether that be technology, regulation, human behavior? What are your thoughts?
I would say that there needs to be a responsible AI regulation with fundamental principles, because the train has really left the station. And I think that is concerning. That would be my one wish from a data privacy perspective. And then world peace. It kind of reminds me of, I don't know if you've seen Miss Congeniality with Sandra Bullock. She's like an undercover FBI agent, and her undercover persona is being a beauty queen. And so at her speech, they had to ask her, what does she want? The pageant question. And so hers was like, well, I want tougher penalties for criminals and world peace. So I'm doing the same thing. I want responsible AI regulation and world peace.
There you go. Excellent. Yeah, you gotta swing for the fences, Sean. Very good. Very good.
Yes.
Well, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm sure we're going to collaborate some more, do a lot more stuff, Chicago stuff in the future. So this will be a lot of fun. But thank you so much. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for inviting me. I love your podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, we'll definitely talk soon. Thank you so much again.
All right, take care. All right, bye.
All right. Bye-bye.